Hey everybody, I am outside and it's quiet time, nap time, so I am going to get my study done outside here today, and this is take 2 or 3 because I'm going a little too long, and to tell you the truth, I have to keep my answers to 15 minutes because unless I'm using another camera, the device I'm using will only upload up to 15 minutes through YouTube. It's because of the device. It's like a long story, but anyway, let's get right into it before I run out of time. Matthew 10, and let's go over number 1 here. And I'm sorry I'm wearing my glasses. It's getting a little bit dark here, and I gotta read. I'll take them off eventually so I can make some eye contact. As a result of his compassion, Jesus sends out the 12. And that's chapter 10, verses 1 through 15, describe their mission. All right, so I answered that in 2 parts. The mission of the 12, and I thought it was very interesting. The word apostle means a sent one. So they go from a disciple or student to an apostle, the sent one. So number 1, part of my answer is take the message first to the covenant people in the regions nearby, which are the lost sheep of Israel. Israel were the covenant people. God made the covenant to send the Messiah to them first, and so that's what he's doing. So he's telling them he doesn't want them to go to the Gentiles first. And so he's not strictly forbidding them to give the gospel and the message of grace to the, to make way, the message of grace of the Lord to Gentiles that he finds along the way. They find along the way, but he is telling them their main focus is to go to Israel. And then also, let's see, now he'd narrowed that even more because he said, the gospel was to be for those who knew they were spiritually sick. We saw that in chapter 9, verse 13. So those who needed a physician. You can find a little bit more about that in Luke 5:31, 32. Number 2, Jesus gave them great power to heal the sick, raise the dead, forbidding them to charge money that would obscure the message of grace. They were permitted, however, to accept support for basic needs. And so he said, don't take, extra tunics, don't take extra purses, don't take all this extra stuff, because he wanted them to, he was sending them out to preach. That's the main objective. He wasn't sending them out to do more than that. That was very important. And the point here is to teach them to trust the Lord to supply needs through generosity from the people they ministered to, and to teach those who received a blessing to take care of the servants of Christ. So that I thought was really, really interesting. And one of the things that kind of came to mind on that was the fact that, and I used to think this way too, a long time ago, but I know a lot of people who are wonderful people, really beautiful people, but for some reason they think, I don't need to go to church. I don't need a church, because I can go out into nature and that's my cathedral and it's just me and God and I don't ever have to go to church. And I know that sometimes people need that time to figure things out. They need a little bit of time maybe they're having some solitude. They feel the need to have some solitude with the Lord, and that's okay. But I think that sometimes people might get it confused into thinking that never being part of the church community is scriptural, and it's not scriptural, it's not biblical. So what we see here is Christ is telling them to go out and make more disciples, and they're to be taken care of by those people who, God is acting in their hearts to help take care of the servants of Christ. And that's what we're supposed to do. That's what the church community does, is that we support and uplift and take care of these people. And I know, some churches, every church, no church is, I want to say no church community, because the church is the believers. We are the church. Jesus lives within us. But no church community is perfect because we're made of imperfect people. And so, everybody has problems and we bring them to church, and that's why we're there. And so we learn long suffering, and we learn patience and love and all the fruits of the Spirit in dealing with each other that way. So it's not okay to take ourselves out and not deal with it, so anyway, that just kind of jumped out at me on that. And I don't mean any offense to anybody in that, but it's a teaching that I think that we all come to grips with, is that Jesus actually does want us to commune with each other, and as well as to commune with him first. Number 2, Jesus warns the disciples that their compassionate ministry will not be warmly received. And we see that in verses 16 through 25. What will they experience? Well, that's kind of scary, actually. The stuff that, he's warning them about is 16 through 25. Oh, my goodness. I mean, it just... he says, "Behold, I send you out as sheep in the midst of wolves. Therefore be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. And beware of men, for they will deliver you up to councils and scourge you in the synagogues. You're going to be brought before, governors and kings for my sake." And basically, they're going to be going through a lot of persecution. They're going to be going through persecution big time. And they did. They're going to be encountering hate, even to the point of death. Persecution, at the very least, they'll be assaulted verbally, insulted, things like that. And, as far as that goes, sometimes I know we're living in a very wonderful, blessed nation, and we don't encounter a lot of this. Every now and then you hear about somebody being brought to court for this or that reason because they're Christian or follower of Christ, and that's very upsetting. Or maybe, people have lost their lives here and there because they have admitted being a Christian. That is true. But widespread, it is, it's not really widespread in this country. Not now, not yet. But it doesn't mean that it doesn't go on still. It really does. And actually, if you want to be aware of that, you can check out Voice of the Martyrs at persecution.com, and you'll see quite a lot of stories that you would think are straight out of the Bible times, that people are really, they're having their homes burnt, their family members are being killed and tortured, and this still is going on around the world. So we're supposed to pray for those people, and for their protection and for their deliverance around the world. We need to be praying for our brothers and sisters. And again, how can we be praying about our brothers and sisters in church communities around the world when if we don't even want to be part of a community where we're at? You know what I mean? I mean, we are part of these communities, and we need to be praying for them. So another point that says that we need to, lift others up in a community there. So another point I wanted to point out was chapter 10, verse 26. Oops. Okay. Therefore, do not fear them, for there is nothing covered that will not be revealed, and hidden that will not be made known. Basically, God is the ultimate judge, so nothing is going to escape him. Nothing is going to escape him. He knows about all of this stuff that's going on. He knows about the persecution. He knows about all of this, but he is allowing it for a time, for a reason. It is in his will. Nothing escapes his will. And that's my next point that I wanted to make here, because number 3 in chapter 10, verses 26 through 33, and here comes that light. Pretty soon it'll be on my face. Jesus prepares his present and future disciples for opposition. Why shouldn't we be afraid of those who oppose us? And the reason why is because, if we look at verse 29, where he says, "Are not 2 sparrows sold for a copper coin, and not one of them falls to the ground apart from your Father's will?" Well, I want you to notice that word, your Father's will, here, because when I used to read this verse, I used to acknowledge it as being your Father's knowledge, and I think that's different than will here, because I was thinking, oh yes, of course God knows about every sparrow that falls on the earth, right? I go to a dollar store that has a big field across from it, and in that big field it's covered with pigeons. It seems like every Las Vegas pigeon in the world goes there because people go in and they buy a big bag of birdseed for $1 and then they throw it out for them, and it's the most beautiful little sight you could see. But once in a while you get these little pigeons that don't stay in the field, and they want to go running into the parking lot and seeing what's over there. And what happens is you get, somebody who's kind of cruel hearted, and they'll just run right over the pigeons. And then so every time I see those poor lost little pigeons that got run over, my heart just sinks, and it just makes me feel so sad. But I have to realize that when it says that, God even realizes when that happens to a sparrow or pigeon. He knows about that. He knows about the person who did that. He knows their heart. And, that all of that doesn't escape his will. It doesn't mean that he wanted that to happen, but he gave them the choice to do right or to do wrong. And they did something wrong. They did something that was cruel. Now they're going to have to deal with the consequences to that, no matter what that is, whether that's carrying the guilt, or, coming to the knowledge that that was wrong later on, that just was a cruel thing to do, answering for that, whatever. Just in the same way that, God didn't want Cain to kill Abel, as we saw in our Genesis studies, yet it fit within his sovereign will, his sovereignty, because nothing falls without that. Nothing falls outside of that. So it's like a knowledge, but it's like he still is in control. You know what I'm saying? Because if you're going to say, well, that bad thing happened outside of his will, then you're saying he's not God. You're saying that he is not sovereign overall, and that isn't true. And this is the problem that people have sometimes when they say, why did this bad thing happen? If there's really a God, it wouldn't have happened. But what's funny is that they don't usually think that something that, Christ was crucified, and went through a horrible death, and this was in God's will. This was still within God's will, because he used that to bring us to him. And that's a horrible thing. Anybody who would have seen that and didn't understand it wouldn't have understood how that worked into everything. And we don't understand everything. We don't. But anyway, I just thought this one little verse here just really made me think about that, how much he really is in control. And let's see, he also talked about picking up our cross and following him. Take up our cross in verse 38. Here, Jesus' first mention of the word cross. Now, the disciples didn't know that he was going to die on a cross. So this is kind of a foretelling hint here. He knew. So to them, it would have evoked a picture of a violent, degrading death. So basically what he was trying to tell them was that, when you send the message out, you need to make sure that people know the importance of total commitment that I'm asking here. Just like the rich ruler of last chapter, when he said that he wanted to follow Christ, then Christ said, he knew his heart, and he said, go sell everything and come back, and he couldn't do that. Jesus knew his heart. He wasn't ready for a total commitment. Next question here is, what does Jesus promise to those who are receptive to our message? And that's in verses 40 and 42. Number one, receiving the message from a believer is tantamount to welcoming the Lord, because since he lives in us, if they refuse that message and if they persecute us, it's like persecuting him. And B, for those who come to Christ with self-renouncing faith, there will be true eternal life. Just as he promised the thief on the cross, which we'll get into later during the crucifixion. The thief had confessed. He knew who he was. He said, I'm a sinner. And he said, remember me in your kingdom. And Jesus said, you will be with me in paradise. And that is his promise to all of us. So we are just about it for time. Love you guys a lot. And I will see you in Matthew 11. If you have any questions, type them below or on the Facebook page. I'll see you then. Many blessings.